Hi everybody, welcome to the week 1 lecture supplement video. I am your instructor, Melissa Stockham. Now if you're watching the video, you realize that is not actually me. That is a set of roses. The reason I'm putting a set of roses on camera, other than myself, is to be completely blunt, I look terrible right now. I have been sick in bed all day. Actually, I've been sick since yesterday, and I had to fly through an entire 5-hour flight from Denver to Orlando completely sick. So you don't want to see me on camera. It would be unprofessional for me to put myself on camera at this moment, but I did want to do the lecture supplement because the show must go on. And I also want to apologize to you. I have not gotten a chance to comment on your discussion questions. That will happen as soon as I am physically able. Do not worry. But stay tuned for that, because this week is always a fascinating week for those. Welcome to week 1 of social psychology. I'm your instructor. And the first thing we ask, and what I have titled this week of the course, is why psychology? Why do we care about psychology? And, because all forms of psychology are based upon kind of the same concept, the idea that we can understand why people think, feel, and do as they do. So I guess the first question we need to ask is, what is psychology? So what is psychology? Psychology is the scientific study of human thought, emotion, and behavior. Now, what does that mean? It is so important to understand. If you get nothing else from this week, please take this away. We look at the scientific study of human emotion, thought, and action. What does that mean? We base it on the scientific method. We don't just kind of look at the world and kind of stick our finger in the wind and determine what people do and based on what. We look at the scientific study. We conduct experiments. We conduct research. This is important because these are things that can be replicated. The closer we can come to uniform results, the closer we can be assured that we have an understanding of why people think, feel, and act as they do. That is, of course, emotions, thoughts, and behavior. Now, we don't look at animal psychology here. I'm not saying that animal psychology is not extremely interesting and useful and important. I'm just saying we don't discuss it in this particular course. Why is the study of psychology important? Because if we have a working knowledge of why people do what they do, we can use that information to better that individual, to help them have an insight into things they might be doing wrong so they can make improvements and keep going, to improve the lives of those around them. One of the big things we do in psychology is therapy. Therapy is, of course, the subject of many really bad movies out there, but it is an idea that we help people to realize that what they're doing wrong and start doing something else. And also we can use that information, if we have an understanding of why people do what they do, and we decide that a certain goal is useful or effort worthy, we can use that information to help the world. People have, as you might guess, and I'm not being sarcastic in saying this, if we can understand why people do what they do, people have a big influence on this world. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way. I mean it in the fact that, if you look at our world, what we do on this world matters and is relevant. So if we have an understanding of why people do what they do, we can use that information to help the world. An example I can think of is recycling. We all hear cliche after cliche about why we should recycle. We see 1,000 videos of landfills. And if you've ever driven by a landfill, you understand why this is relevant. And the idea is it would be a good idea for people to stop putting so much plastic and paper and things that can be used again in the landfills. So how do we get people to recycle? What works better? Do people respond better to force? If you don't recycle, it's a $25 tax for what you're putting in the landfills. Or do they respond better by incentives? Do people respond better by saying, okay, if you do recycle and you can provide proof, receipts or something else. I'm not sure how you do it, but maybe receipts for recycling. You get a credit on your taxes, or you get, or is that enough of an incentive? Could an incentive be other things. The idea being what makes people do things that we would like for them to do more often, like recycle. So these are all questions that we look at in psychology. We look at social psychology, which is the topic of this course. We ask how people act in social situations. When people are in groups. Now, of course, when we talk about groups, we have to ask, what is a group? A group is any collection of more than one individual. Now, we all know people, and I am being sarcastic in saying this, who can be what we call a walking party, where by themselves they're a riot. But what we look at here is, like, it could be two people, a couple. It could be a dyad, which is the definition of two people. It could be a group of maybe 7 or 8 people. People in a work situation who are all on a board of directors of some sort. It could be a collection of 50 workers. It could be an entire country. It could be all of the human race. How do people respond to one another? And of course, there are several different layers to this. There's the fact that there are oftentimes conflicting motivations among people. There's oftentimes a need for social cohesion. There are all kinds of different layers to that. So we look at that in social psychology. And based upon that, we have a better understanding of why people do what they do in groups. I talk a little bit about the versatility of psychology. And, one of the big questions we always hear in school is, where am I ever going to use this? I would always say that wherever there is people, there can be psychology. When you look at people in the world of the education world, there is school psychology, there is educational psychology, and there is a lot of research that goes into that. If you look at people who are experiencing health problems, there is health psychology. There is a study of what people are doing and what emotional mindsets they have that might be making them sick. Actually, we talk these days a lot about the idea of a type A personality. What is a type A personality? A type A personality is an individual who is much more likely, research has determined, to have a heart attack than others. Who came up with the concept of type A personality? It was actually a cardiologist, a man named Jenkins. And Jenkins was a cardiologist, and one thing he noticed after a certain period of time is he kept having to replace the credences in his waiting room. They were all kind of slanted, and the cushions were absolutely destroyed in the front of these credences. What he realized is all these people who were at a cardiologist's office, because they were probably going to have a heart attack fairly soon, would all sit at the front of their seat. They were always on the edge of the seat, always hunched forward like they were ready to meet the next challenge. So for that reason, Jenkins looked at this, and he kind of created a scale of questions that was later verified by science that demonstrated that the people with a type A personality have to be very, very on guard that they do not have a heart attack. So that is where we learned that. But anywhere else, sports psychology, people who are involved in sports. I mean, a lot of your major NFL, NBA, NHL, MLS, as much as soccer is a sport. Sorry for any soccer fans who are out there, but come on now, it's soccer. But they invest a lot of time and effort into finding psychologists who can help their players get to the next level. So, but anywhere where there's people, there is psychology. I got to tell you a story. Many of you, I'm assuming, are, and I'm totally dating myself in saying this, too young to remember life before the internet. I'm not. I was actually a graduate student the first time I ever used the internet. I had already graduated from college and had a degree by that point. And why do I mention that? I had this one professor in post-baccalaureate school who was he was actually a researcher who studied how to improve computer memory and how to use computerized memory to enhance computer performance. And I started talking to him one day, in part because I won a better grade in his class. And I talked to him about, this thing called the internet. How can we use the internet to determine who's on the internet, ask them moral questions and whatnot. And he thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And he encouraged me to look at ways to do research to determine, based upon the psychology of people who are on the internet. Bear in mind now, back then, very few people were on the internet. Back then, Amazon was just a river in South America. Uber was just a way of saying that something was really good. And eBay was, what? So the internet was totally in its embryonic stages. Most people who were on the internet were computer geeks, or I shouldn't use that word, that's a politically incorrect term, but people who were kind of, really, really into computers, and people who, for their job or whatever reason, had to use computers a lot. Those are the only people who were on the internet at the time. My best friend actually studied computers in college, and I was on the internet before she was. But when she got on it, she took to a duck of water and went to work for this company called America Online, and actually did very well there. But back then, we didn't understand these things. And now, if I had that kind of knowledge, bear in mind, back then, Jeff Bezos was just a stockbroker in New York City, not the richest man in the world. And how did he become the richest man in the world? The internet. So having an understanding of and on top of Facebook. I mean, today Facebook is such a part of our lives. I mean, how many of us today, before, instead of like we did in the old days, going outside and getting a newspaper that some kid threw on our driveway, how many of us start our morning by grabbing our phone and going on Facebook? I do. You guys do. A lot of people do. What is Facebook? It is a social networking system. It's how we connect with other people. That can be good. People can find out information very quickly, or it can be bad. How many of us have read something on Facebook that we know that individual would have never had the courage to say to our faces, but yet nonetheless did, and it ruins friendships? Facebook can ruin marriages. It can ruin things. Now, so Facebook is a tool. It's like anything else. We can use it for good, or we can use it for bad. When we use it to raise money for our local zoo, we use it for good. When we use it to tear down somebody who, just because we don't like them for whatever reason, we use it for bad. It's a tool just like anything else. The thing is, we have to put values behind it, and we have to realize that Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is just a reflection of us. How do we use it towards good ends? How do we use social psychology towards good ends? We can use psychology to hurt people, or we can use it to help people. How do we use it to help people? And with that, I will look forward to seeing you in the chat room. Take care.